At Windsor Castle, on the third floor of the private east wing, there is a small oak cabinet with a single brass keyhole. That cabinet has held the same object for almost 8 years. Only one aide has ever carried the key. Only one person has ever been named as the intended recipient. And for 8 years, the recipient did not know the object existed. Music. This week, the aide unlocked the cabinet for the last time. He removed a single sealed envelope, and he carried it out of Windsor for the first time since Queen Elizabeth had placed it inside herself. Princess Catherine received the envelope at Kensington Palace on Tuesday morning. The senior aide handed it to her without ceremony, without announcement, and without a single word from Buckingham Palace's press office. Catherine broke the seal at her private desk. Inside the envelope was a letter, written in Queen Elizabeth's own hand 2 years before her death. And inside a small velvet pouch, folded into the letter, was a pearl brooch that had once belonged to the Queen Mother. Music. Catherine read the letter twice, and then Catherine did the unthinkable. Catherine placed the letter and the brooch inside the top drawer of her desk, closed the drawer gently, and did not tell Charles what had happened for 3 full days. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to like this video and subscribe so you do not miss a single update. The senior aide arrived at Kensington Palace at 9:45 in the morning. He carried a single leather folder under his arm. He wore no crest. He was not accompanied by a driver, a secretary, or a press aide. A senior aide, in simple words, is a trusted member of the royal household who carries private messages between palaces on behalf of the monarch or the late monarch. This one had served Queen Elizabeth for 28 years, and he had been entrusted with the envelope on a Sunday afternoon in 2020, when the Queen had asked him to close the door of her private sitting room behind him. Catherine received him in her small green office at Kensington. The princess did not know why he had come. Catherine did not ask. The aide simply said that he had a delivery from the late Queen. He handed her the envelope. He bowed once, and he left the room. Music. The whole delivery lasted less than 90 seconds. Catherine sat at her desk for a long moment. The princess did not open the envelope immediately. Catherine looked at the seal. Catherine looked at the handwriting on the front. Her name, in Queen Elizabeth's careful script, written in blue ink. Catherine felt her hands go still, and then very slowly, Catherine broke the seal. The letter inside was 2 pages long. It was written in Queen Elizabeth's private hand, without any household letterhead, without any date, and without any signature at the end other than a small looping E. At the top of the first page, Queen Elizabeth had written a single line, "My dear Catherine." Music. And beneath that line, the Queen had written the private blessing that Catherine would carry for the rest of her royal life. William entered the room 40 minutes later. The prince did not knock. William simply walked in, saw Catherine sitting very still at her desk, and understood without asking that something had happened. Catherine looked up at him. She did not speak. William closed the door behind him and sat down in the chair across from her desk. Music. Catherine handed him the letter without a word. William read it slowly. When he finished, William set the letter down on the desk. And then William did something Catherine had not seen him do in almost 3 years. William put his hand across his face and cried quietly, without shame, for almost a full minute. Anne was told about the letter later that afternoon. The Princess Royal did not react immediately. Anne only asked a single question. Anne asked who else had known about the envelope during the 8 years it had sat inside the cabinet at Windsor. The answer was one person, only the senior aide. Anne closed her eyes for a moment. Music. The Princess Royal understood, in that quiet second, that her mother had planned this delivery with more care than she had ever revealed to anyone, including her own children. Charles was told about the letter on the 3rd day. The king was at Clarence House when Catherine, at William's private request, came to see him. Catherine did not bring the letter with her. She did not need to. Catherine simply told her father-in-law that Queen Elizabeth had left something for her and that it had arrived earlier in the week. Charles listened carefully. The monarch did not interrupt. When Catherine finished speaking, Charles did not ask to see the letter. Charles did not ask what it said. Charles only asked one thing. Charles asked whether his mother had written it in her own hand. Catherine said yes. Music. Charles nodded once, closed his eyes for a long moment, and quietly said, "Then it is done." And in that moment, without knowing why, Catherine felt the weight of the letter settle into her shoulders in a way that would not lift again. Camilla was told last. The Queen Consort was in her private sitting room at Buckingham Palace when the household briefing reached her. Camilla did not speak for a long moment. She set down her cup, folded her hands in her lap, and stared straight ahead. Camilla felt anger first, then hurt, then something she had never allowed herself to feel about the late Queen before. Exclusion. Music. But to understand why Queen Elizabeth had chosen Catherine, and why she had chosen to leave nothing similar for Camilla, the story had to be pulled backward to a quiet summer afternoon at Sandringham, 8 years earlier, when the Queen had made her decision in a garden nobody thought anyone would ever notice. The decision did not begin with the letter. It began at Sandringham in August 2017, on a warm afternoon when Queen Elizabeth had walked alone in the private rose garden behind the house. According to a documented household account later filed by her personal secretary, the Queen had spent almost 40 minutes in that garden that afternoon, and had returned to the house with a quiet clarity about a decision she had been considering for almost 2 years. Queen Elizabeth had watched Catherine carefully for a long time. The monarch had watched Catherine at family Christmases, at Trooping the Colour, at private lunches, and at moments when Catherine had thought no one was paying attention. The Queen had seen the way Catherine handled the children, the way Catherine handled William, the way Catherine handled the press, the public, and the household staff. And most of all, the Queen had seen how Catherine handled the memory of Diana. Quietly, respectfully, without ever trying to replace or reshape it. Music. That was the observation that had settled the decision. The Queen wrote the letter herself. According to a private household briefing later shared with her senior secretariat, Queen Elizabeth had refused any assistance from her aides in preparing the document. The monarch had written it in her private sitting room at Sandringham over the course of 3 afternoons. She had used her own paper, her own pen, her own ink, and no one had been permitted to enter the room until the letter was sealed inside its envelope. Music. When Queen Elizabeth handed the sealed envelope to her senior aide the following Sunday, she had given him only 3 instructions. Keep it at Windsor. Tell no one. Deliver it to Catherine when the moment feels right. After I am gone. The senior aide had accepted the envelope in silence. He had returned to Windsor that same evening. He had placed the envelope inside the small oak cabinet in the private east wing. He had locked the cabinet with the single brass key, and he had carried that key on his person every day for the following 8 years. He had never opened the cabinet in that time. He had never mentioned the letter to another human being, not to his colleagues, not to his family, not even to Queen Elizabeth in the years that followed. Music. The letter had simply waited, as Queen Elizabeth had planned that it would. The choice to leave nothing for Camilla was not accidental. According to a documented conversation later shared with Anne by the late Queen's private secretary, Queen Elizabeth had considered the question carefully. The monarch had felt, quietly, that Camilla had already been given what she needed. Queen Elizabeth had accepted Camilla into the family. Queen Elizabeth had approved the marriage. Queen Elizabeth had, in her own way, made peace with the choices Charles had made. But the Queen had also felt with equal clarity that the role Catherine would one day carry required a different kind of blessing, a private one, a personal one, a blessing that did not need to be balanced against anyone else's feelings, because it was not about anyone else. Queen Elizabeth had told Anne about the decision only once, and only in passing. According to a documented household account, The Queen had said one line to Anne in the private sitting room at Balmoral on a quiet evening in the autumn of 2019. The Queen had said, "Catherine will carry it. Camilla will not need to." Anne had understood immediately what her mother meant. The Princess Royal had not asked for clarification. Anne had simply nodded, and the conversation had moved on to other matters. Anne had not spoken about the exchange to anyone, not even to Charles. Music. It had waited, like the letter itself, until the moment was right. The Queen had also left a small item inside the envelope, a pearl brooch. According to a private jeweler's record later confirmed by the household, the brooch had originally belonged to Queen Elizabeth's own mother, the Queen Mother. It had been given to Queen Elizabeth on her wedding day. Queen Elizabeth had worn it privately, at family occasions, for most of her adult life. She had never worn it publicly. She had never lent it to anyone. And she had chosen, in the last years of her life, to leave it to Catherine, along with the letter, without ever telling anyone in her family that she had made that choice. Music. That was the second blessing. Quieter than the letter, but no less deliberate. The final instruction Queen Elizabeth had left for the senior aide was the most careful. The Queen had asked him to wait until Catherine had reached a specific moment in her royal life. The Queen had not named the moment. The Queen had trusted the aide's judgment, and the aide had waited 8 years, watching Catherine step forward through moments large and small, until this particular week in this particular month, when the private household calendar had noted an event that finally matched what the aide believed Queen Elizabeth had meant. He had unlocked the cabinet the night before. He had held the envelope in his hands for a long time, and he had carried it to Kensington the following morning, without telling a single member of the palace household that he was doing so. Charles did not know. Camilla did not know. William did not know. Even Anne had not known. Only one man, on that particular morning, understood what Queen Elizabeth had planned and understood that the moment had finally come. The news of the letter moved slowly at first. William had asked Catherine not to speak of it publicly, and Catherine had not needed to be asked twice. The princess had placed the letter in her private drawer, had placed the brooch beside it, and had carried on with her scheduled engagements, as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. Every senior aide who saw Catherine that week noticed a quiet steadiness in her that had not been there before. A quiet steadiness, in plain words, means the calm sense of purpose that comes when a person understands their place in something larger than themselves. Catherine had understood something on Tuesday morning that she had never understood before, and the household could feel it, even if the household did not yet know why. Charles felt it first. The king had returned to Clarence House after Catherine's private visit and had sat alone in his study for almost 2 hours. Charles did not speak to anyone. Charles did not review any papers. Charles simply sat, with the door closed, thinking about his mother. Music. The monarch had suspected for many years that Queen Elizabeth had made quiet arrangements about the future of the family that she had never shared with him. Now Charles knew for certain, and the knowledge did not upset him. It only clarified what he had already come to accept. Anne came to see Charles that evening. The Princess Royal did not need to ask what had happened. Anne had already been briefed by the senior aide at William's request. Anne sat down across from her brother and spoke plainly. Anne said that their mother had made her decision in 2017 and had waited 8 years to see it delivered, and that no one in the family had any standing to question it now. Charles did not disagree. The king only nodded quietly and asked Anne one question. Charles asked whether their mother had left anything similar for Camilla. Anne answered honestly. Anne said no. Music. Charles closed his eyes for a long moment, and then Charles asked Anne to help him find the right way to tell his wife. Camilla was told the following morning. The Queen Consort was in her private sitting room when Charles arrived. Charles sat down across from her. The king did not begin with the letter. Charles began instead by saying that his mother had left a private blessing for Catherine, delivered earlier that week, and that no similar blessing had been left for anyone else. Camilla did not speak for a long moment. The queen consort set down her teacup carefully. She folded her hands. Camilla looked at her husband. Music. Then Camilla asked one question. Camilla asked whether the late queen had said anything about her, Camilla, in any of the documents her mother had left behind. Charles answered honestly. Charles said no. Camilla did not cry. The queen consort did not shout. Camilla simply stood, walked to the window of her sitting room, and looked out at the small palace garden below. Camilla felt anger first, then hurt, then something older and heavier. Camilla felt the truth of what the late queen had thought of her. Queen Elizabeth had accepted Camilla. Queen Elizabeth had approved the marriage. But Queen Elizabeth had never, in her private heart, considered Camilla the kind of woman to whom she would entrust her mother's brooch. And Camilla, standing at the window that afternoon, understood that with a clarity she had spent 20 years trying not to face. Music. The story reached the papers by the following week. The palace had not confirmed anything. No aide had briefed a journalist. But the household is a small place, and stories about Queen Elizabeth's private wishes had a way of finding their way into the sunlight. By Thursday, a single line began appearing in the royal columns. Late Queen left private blessing for Catherine. Camilla saw the line and Camilla's face darkened. William saw it and William did not react. Charles saw it and Charles said nothing. Anne saw it and simply nodded once. Music. Charles asked for a small household meeting on Friday. The king cleared the private secretary's office of every aide except one. Charles sat down at the desk and dictated a single line that would form the official household position if the story continued to spread. The line was calm. It was measured. It was, in the end, the only thing the palace could say. The private wishes of the late queen are her own, and the household honors them without commentary. That single sentence, when it was quietly briefed to two senior royal correspondents on Saturday morning, ended the coverage almost immediately. The country understood. The story stopped growing, and the palace, for the first time in a week, began to breathe. Catherine asked to see Camilla the following Monday. The princess did not send an aide. Catherine did not go through her own private secretary. Catherine simply picked up her phone and called Camilla directly, at a private line that only 3 people in the family used, and asked whether Camilla might be free for a quiet cup of tea that afternoon at Clarence's house. Camilla accepted. The queen consort did not know what Catherine wanted to say, but Camilla understood that whatever it was, it deserved the courtesy of a face-to-face conversation. Catherine arrived at Clarence's house at 3 o'clock. She came alone, without her private secretary, without any household staff, and without any car crest displayed on the vehicle. Camilla met her at the door of the private sitting room. The 2 women sat down across from each other, in front of a small tea service, with the door closed behind them. Music. Catherine did not begin with the letter. Catherine did not begin with the brooch. Catherine began instead with a single quiet sentence. Catherine said, "I did not come to talk about what she left me. I came for what she meant." Camilla did not respond immediately. The queen consort looked down at her hands, and for the first time in a very long time, Camilla did not try to shape the conversation. Camilla only listened, Catherine explained gently. The princess said that she had spent 3 days thinking about what the letter meant, and what the brooch meant, and what the choice to deliver them privately meant. Catherine said that she had come to one conclusion. The late queen had not written that letter to lift Catherine above anyone else in the family. Queen Elizabeth had written it because she had wanted Catherine to know quietly that she was seen. That was all. The letter had not been meant as a comparison. It had not been meant as a ranking. It had not been meant as a message to anyone else in the household. It had simply been Queen Elizabeth's way of telling one specific woman, in one specific moment, that she had been watched, and that the watching had ended in approval. Music. Camilla listened. The Queen Consort did not defend herself. She did not accuse Catherine of anything. Camilla only allowed a small tear to fall, and then another, and she did not wipe them away. Camilla said, after a long moment, that she understood. Camilla said that she had spent the last week feeling excluded, and had realized, slowly, that the exclusion had not been personal. It had simply been the late Queen's honest opinion, delivered in the only way Queen Elizabeth had known how to deliver it, privately. And Camilla, sitting across from Catherine that afternoon, understood that she could either fight the truth of it, or she could accept it. And Camilla chose, quietly, to accept it. Music. Catherine did something then that no one in the household would ever have expected. The princess reached into the small bag she had brought with her and removed a folded piece of paper. Catherine unfolded it and placed it on the table between them. It was a copy, in Catherine's own handwriting, of one paragraph from the letter Queen Elizabeth had written. Catherine did not read it aloud. Catherine only turned the paper toward Camilla and let the Queen Consort read it herself. Camilla read it slowly. The paragraph, in the late Queen's careful language, described what Elizabeth had valued most in the family she was leaving behind: loyalty, patience, and the willingness to hold the family together, even when no one was watching. Catherine had not shared the paragraph to prove a point. Catherine had shared it because that paragraph, in Catherine's private view, described Camilla as clearly as it described anyone. Music. Camilla looked up from the paper. Her eyes were wet. The Queen Consort did not speak. Camilla only reached across the table and very briefly placed her hand on top of Catherine's. Catherine did not move her hand. Catherine did not pull away. The two women sat that way for perhaps 10 seconds. And then Camilla folded the paragraph carefully, placed it in her own drawer, and stood up from the table. Camilla did not walk Catherine to the door. Camilla simply nodded once, quietly, and let the princess find her own way out. Charles was told about the meeting later that evening. The king asked Catherine only one question. Charles asked whether Camilla was all right. Catherine said yes. Charles closed his eyes for a moment. The monarch had not slept well in a week, but that single word from his daughter-in-law let him finally exhale. And Charles said very quietly, "You did what she would have wanted." Catherine understood who he meant, and Catherine did not answer because there was nothing left that needed to be said. By the following morning, the story had reached every British newspaper. The palace had not confirmed anything. No aide had briefed any journalist, but the story had traveled anyway, as royal stories always do, and by breakfast time, the front pages of 5 major newspapers carried variations of the same headline: "Late Queen's private blessing goes to Catherine." A national front page, in simple words, is the main image and headline of a major newspaper that shapes how the country talks about a story for the day. This one mattered because it did not attack Camilla. It did not celebrate Catherine. It simply reported the private blessing as a fact and let the reader draw their own conclusions. A senior royal correspondent framed the story on the morning news with one careful sentence: "This was not a message from the past. It was a message about the future." Music. That single line traveled across the country within the hour. It gave the public the language to understand what Queen Elizabeth had chosen, without turning the story into a war between the two women who had loved her son. The country did not need to choose between Camilla and Catherine. The country only needed to understand that the late Queen had made a private decision, and that the palace was quietly honoring it. Outside Windsor Castle, a small crowd began to gather near the Long Walk by mid-morning. They came, most of them, carrying single white lilies. There were no signs, there were no chants. There was only the quiet placing of flowers along the grass near the long walk gates. Windsor mattered because it had been Queen Elizabeth's most beloved home, and the lilies on the grass carried a meaning older than the day's news. A woman standing near the gates spoke to a national broadcaster with one simple line. She said that the late Queen had always known who her family was, and that the blessing did not surprise her. The broadcaster did not add commentary. It let the sentence stand. Music. Public sentiment moved gently. The country did not celebrate. The country did not argue. The country only seemed to feel, quietly, that something Queen Elizabeth had wanted had finally come to pass, and that the family had accepted it with grace. Catherine kept her scheduled engagement at a children's hospice in the afternoon. The princess did not mention the letter. Catherine did not mention the brooch. Catherine only spoke briefly about the importance of gentleness in family life, and about the small, quiet ways that love is passed from one generation to the next. That short message was noticed, and it defined the public mood for the rest of the day. Camilla did not appear in public. The Queen Consort remained at Clarence House, and her office released no statement of any kind. That silence, which might have looked like defeat a week earlier, looked like grace on this particular afternoon. Camilla had accepted the private blessing quietly. The public noticed that too. Music. Anne released a short line through her private office. The Princess Royal said only that her mother's private wishes were her own, and that the family honored them fully. That sentence did not mention Catherine. It did not mention Camilla. It did not mention the letter. But it defined the entire day for the palace, and it gave the country permission to accept the story as an act of quiet love, rather than an act of family drama. Music. By evening, the storm had softened into something closer to warmth. And in the middle of that warmth, one image remained. A small pearl brooch, 3 generations of women, and a letter that had waited 8 years in a locked cabinet at Windsor to say what only Queen Elizabeth had ever needed to say. The palace confirmed a small institutional change on the 3rd day. Going forward, all future private household matters connected to the late Queen's wishes would be handled directly by William and Catherine, working closely with Anne, and reported to Charles only when the matter required his formal approval. A private household matter, in plain terms, means a decision that stays inside the immediate royal family without any public announcement or press briefing. This change did not name Camilla. It did not exclude Camilla. It simply clarified the shape of the household as Queen Elizabeth had quietly designed it in the last years of her life, without telling anyone she was doing so. Charles signed the small protocol document alone in his study at Clarence House. The king did not call Camilla. Charles did not call William. Charles simply signed the paper, placed it in the household record, and closed the drawer gently. Music. The monarch did not feel loss. Charles felt instead the quiet weight of accepting a decision his mother had made long before she died. And Charles understood, sitting alone at his father's old desk, that some blessings are given not to raise one person above another, but to make sure the family knows, quietly, who is holding it together. And in the case of Catherine, Queen Elizabeth had known the answer to that question for almost 8 years. Catherine kept the letter in her private drawer at Kensington. The princess did not lend it to anyone. Catherine did not photograph it. Catherine did not share the contents with any household staff. The letter belonged to her, and to the memory of the woman who had written it, and to no one else. Catherine wore the brooch privately, at a small family lunch at Windsor 2 weeks later, without announcing it, without drawing attention to it. William saw it on her collar and did not speak. Anne saw it and quietly nodded once across the table. Charles saw it, and for the first time in weeks, smiled a small, honest smile. Music. Camilla was there too. The Queen Consort saw the brooch. Camilla did not react. Camilla only reached across the table, took a small piece of bread, and passed it quietly to Catherine, who accepted it with a small nod of her own. That single gesture, exchanged between the two women without a word spoken, was the moment the family, quietly, agreed to move on. The palace did not celebrate. The palace did not explain. The palace only continued. The letter had been delivered. The brooch had been given. The private blessing had, at last, come home to the woman it had been written for. And beside all of it, standing quietly at the back of a small East Wing corridor at Windsor, was the truth the family had spent 8 years not knowing. Queen Elizabeth had chosen. The choice had been quiet, patient, and deliberate. Catherine had received it. Camilla had accepted it. And Britain, for one gentle week, had watched a royal family remember how to hold itself together in the way the late Queen had always hoped it would. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next video.